welcome to the 2015 Stan Bergstein Writing Award. This is our fourth year doing this. We're really pleased to have Fasig-Tipton as a venue. It's just been really nice to see such a cross-section of people from thoroughbred racing, harness racing, and then we have a great representation from local schools like University of Louisville, University of Kentucky, and some other equine programs. It's been heartening to see the turnout tonight. But of course, Barry Irwin came up with the idea for this award after Stan Bergstein died in 2011. He was someone that Barry really looked up to. So we've really been focused on identifying the right kind of stories to nominate and have our judges look over every year. And I just want to first start out with a recognition of our nominees that are here tonight. Frank Anks from the Blood Horse, Natalie Voss from the Pollock Report, and Chris Whitstruck, who writes for the United States Trotting Association website. I'd like to introduce Barry Irwin. He's the founder and CEO of Team Valor International.
Thank you, Jeff. And thanks everybody for coming out to this event. I know it's not easy coming out at this time of night and then trying to figure out when you're going to eat dinner, blah, blah, blah. So thanks for doing it. And also like to welcome the students from the various schools. We reached out to young people this year, and we kind of ratcheted up the size of our venue and the event, and we hope to continue and within a few years maybe fill the whole place. The previous 3 years, I think we might have averaged, first couple of years we had 25 people each. We went to the University of Arizona's racetrack program, intern program, whatever it's called. And there were about 75 people there, but we had no idea if they were there to really see us or not, so we're not going to count that one. But we had more than 135 people RSVP for this event, which is very gratifying. Horse racing is unique. Unlike other major sports, ours encompasses creating, birthing, nurturing, training, and racing its athletes. It's an all-encompassing industry. Breeders create our product, trainers condition our athletes, farm managers care for our mares, stallion managers develop our sires. And this circle of equine life is supported by sales companies, racetracks, and veterinarians. For the initial 150 years, organized horse racing and breeding and selling in America were chronicled by a free and vigorous press. In the last decade, this has all changed. Today, a young woman named Alicia Winks Hughes, who covers racing for our local newspaper, the Lexington Herald-Leader, as of November 1st, stood alone as the last remaining beat writer for a daily paper in the whole of America. I'll let that sink in. It doesn't take a crystal ball to figure out that if our sport and supporting elements of the industry do not have a thriving presence of writers able to ply their trade, our entire enterprise will not be long for this planet. Replacing the dailies, thankfully, has been some internet websites that cover racing and provide turf writers with an outlet for their stories. The recently developed thoroughbred racing commentary springs to mind. And if you haven't seen that, you can get it on the internet. And they had a fantastic editorial by Charlie Hayward, formerly of NYRA and the Racing Form, definitely worth reading. However, there are not nearly enough places where an appetite exists for investigative stories or op-ed pieces. When Stan Bergstein died 4 years ago, I started a writing award, not only to honor him, but to encourage other outlets and writers to generate hard-hitting stories. I fear Daily Racing Form would never hire another writer to take Mr. Bergstein's place. Alas, they have not. No sport or sports-related industry that interacts with its fans and supporters as much as horse racing can hope to grow and thrive, or hold their own for that matter, until it is covered and analyzed by serious journalists. I had hoped when starting the Bergstein Award that the $25,000 first prize would encourage writers to submit more hard-hitting stories. Over the last 4 years, we have encountered some marvelous pieces of racing-related journalism. Most of the stories have come from 3 sources, basically all of them available online, from the Pollock Report, the Thoroughbred Daily News, and the Blood Horse. 2 writers have risen to the fore. Ex-Blood Horse editor Ray Pollock, who unfortunately couldn't be here tonight, and Frank Angst of the Blood Horse. If the Bergstein Award has caused more hard-hitting pieces to be written, the evidence of it has eluded me. 8 stories received nominations this year. I will say this about the 8 stories. Each one of them is a gem, and each one, seriously, is deserving of this award. That old canard we hear every spring about it being an honor just to be nominated for an Academy Award, well, in this instance of the 2015 Stanley Bergstein Writing Award, it's actually true. The quality brought to the enterprise this year in the nominated pieces is truly inspiring. I am awed by each one of them, and I will let you in on a little trade secret. The 5 judges had a nearly impossible task in picking a winner. It went right down to the wire. We have seen recently the emergence of some new online publications, blogs, and websites that promise to fill the void left by the demise of traditional publications. Racing exists today because a lot of old white-haired guys, not unlike me, have maintained I'm writing my own copy, have maintained a lifelong passion for the sport of kings, and have used their energy and capital to support and in some instances prop up the game, and flat out simply refuse to let it die. Tonight, we purposely invited a lot of young people to attend our award ceremony, to send them the message that if they want to see our great sport continue to be a presence on the national scene, they're going to have to use their creativity and energy to become involved. We need more stories and more platforms to make them available to readers. Racetrack publicity and promotion alone cannot move the enterprise forward. Only journalism can stimulate the intellect and jumpstart the heart of its followers. We need thinkers and enthusiasts to write stories online on websites that have not even been initiated yet. We need to generate some written dialogue between those who follow the sport and those who are responsible for putting on the show. What would Broadway or the movies be without critics and interaction? I remain hopeful that young folks with passion and ideas will fill the void left by Stan Bergstein, the Thoroughbred Times, and Daily Racing Form's editorial pages by adding to the already existing outlets in our industry. Thank you very much.
This past spring, Barry came across an op-ed from an unusual source. It was the World Anti-Doping Agency's website, and immediately it was clear that it was something that we had to read, and we wanted as many people as we could possibly get to read it, about the important role of writers, opinion writers, journalists in the war against corruption in sports. And just this past week, WADA has been at the center of a doping scandal you probably heard about with Russian athletes. And so we are very privileged, I think, to have Ben Nichols from the World Anti-Doping Agency. He's the senior media manager. He's been a spokesman throughout this week for this particular topic with Russia, and he was able to come from Montreal for this evening's event. And I'm very happy to have Ben come up on the stage now.
Ladies and gentlemen, members of the racing community, members of the media and aspiring journalists, a very good evening to you all. It has been quite a week. Those of you near a television screen or flicking through the pages of the newspapers will have seen that on Monday the World Anti-Doping Agency had an independent commission release its 300-page report into widespread doping in Russian athletics. There's no doubt that this was the biggest day in the World Anti-Doping Agency's 16-year history. If you believe some of the commentary in the media, this was the biggest day, the biggest scandal facing sport in a generation. And so it's all the more timely to be speaking to you here this evening, given that the WADA report was in fact instigated by an investigative journalist. If I cast my mind back a few months, I think it was late August. It was a fairly dreary Monday in Montreal, and I received a call out of the blue from Barry. And he asked me if I'd be interested in speaking here this evening. I've since that time heard a huge amount about Barry's accomplishments and indeed his firm commitment to clean sport. So thank you firstly to Barry for having me speak here this evening. It's an honor to talk to you all on the influence the media can have in fostering clean sport. It's also an opportune moment to speak to you, and not just because of what might happen with the US Anti-Doping Agency's involvement in drug testing and horse racing, but an opportune moment because of what we're seeing play out through a number of doping scandals in the media at this time. There's unquestionably a huge amount of focus on doping in sport right now. In anti-doping, we're at something of a juncture. We have reached a crossroads. Earlier this year, my organization put in place a set of new anti-doping rules, and we await with interest to see the impact they are having through the first set of statistics next year. We are also at this time faced with a number of doping scandals, appearing on both the front pages and the back pages of our newspapers. And we're seeing these play out in the media because, after all, bad news is often good news in the media's eyes. Now, we often only hear of doping when a scandal breaks, like earlier this week, and one of our heroes is found out to be not quite what we once hoped. Canadians heard about doping in 1988 when Olympic gold medalist for a brief period, Ben Johnson, if you remember him, he shortly after failed a drugs test. In the United States, you heard about it with Marion Jones, and of course, most recently, with what was described the most professional, sophisticated system of doping in sport ever, with the one-time poster boy of cycling, Lance Armstrong. Now, doping may not shock the public anymore, but it does continue to disappoint, and it leaves us with the thought that they're all at it. There are, ladies and gentlemen, ever larger doses of doping fatigue amongst the public. But media don't shirk away from giving significant television airtime or dedicating column inches to doping in sport. It's the real investigative journalism, however, those media that are searching for instances of doping and looking to bring it to the attention of anti-doping authorities. It's the tail wagging the dog, if you like. It's this that I wanted to speak to you about here this evening. And this is where journalism can have a real impact, where the media can really come into their own in this fourth estate role. In England, which is where I'm from, in case you hadn't guessed already, the media acting as a fourth estate exists in abundance. Many media don't shy away from such a role. In fact, journalism is set deep within the British DNA, and it has been for centuries. Any suggestion of excessive interference or censorship is often sneered at by the print press. And that view is all the more surprising given the very tough defamation laws that editors are faced with. But that press culture is far from the same in other parts of the world. Many journalists don't ask the tough questions to unravel instances of doping. Now, perhaps this might be put down to what we call too much establishment journalism, a problem you might be suffering from in horse racing today. In this era of decline for traditional media and an era of tight budgets, is there too much of a cozy relationship between journalists and their paymasters, such as the advertisers or sponsors? Is there a conflict of interest? Or, in what today is a very cluttered media sphere, is there in fact too much vying for attention amongst the media organizations, which spurs on sensational journalism in order for them to stand out from the crowd? Now, as with much in life, it's probably a bit of both. In the anti-doping industry, we have to continually encourage media to support clean sport. Clean athletes are the overwhelming majority, after all, and it's the public who want to see a level playing field and believe in their sporting heroes on the field of play. And as great as sport still is today, and it is omnipresent in modern day life, it has become a huge global business. So much money is available to the victors in sport today that a win-at-all-costs mentality is all pervasive. This mentality is evident in all sports. We recently heard about doping in esports, which is computer gaming. Yes, I can hear you say is nothing sacred anymore. And yet the public, quite rightly, retains the honest, fair play values they've cherished for as long as we've known sport. We view sport as something that must be competed fairly on a level playing field through hard work, not through artificial means. And we continue to be disgusted by cheating. And it's in this context that the media report doping. The outrage we see in the media is really the public's outrage. The media is the mouthpiece of the public. The media is the public servant. Every doping scandal seems to be reported as something of a cat and mouse game. It's the regulators versus the cheats, and the cheats are often seen as one step ahead. In the wake of doping problems in his own sport, the new president of the International Athletics Federation, Lord Sebastian Coe, recently said that athletics was about much more than test tubes, urine, and blood. Well, anti-doping today is about much more than test tubes, urine, and blood, because we value investigations, we value whistleblowing on a par with traditional scientific testing. We have a huge number of tools now at our disposal, and it's here that the media can really play a part. Earlier this year, I wrote a piece called Media, the Fourth Estate in Anti-Doping, which incidentally I later heard Barry had read. In that piece, I argued that the media, if they carried out their role in the right way, can be very important to anti-doping, alongside the other estates, sport, government, athletes. I stressed that the established authorities couldn't defeat this issue alone. The media could have a true and positive impact. So how can the media directly impact the work of anti-doping organizations? Well, firstly, they can shine a light on instances of doping, bringing this behavior to the public's attention. As with any societal issue, and doping does now affect wider society, not just sport, we need doping scandals to help expedite action in cleaning up a sport or a country. The media can, as can the public, report doping through the various whistleblowing channels we have available at WADA and at other organizations. And perhaps equally importantly, they can educate the public on not only why doping is wrong in this win-at-all-costs era, but on how the anti-doping community operates and what work it does to level the playing field. And let me tell you, it does a lot of work. Education, investigations, testing, research. These are just a few of the areas in which the community operates. If we look at the media's role in doping scandals, a few of you might have seen that earlier this year, there was a BBC Panorama television documentary alleging doping practices relating to the Nike Oregon Training Academy here in the United States and relating to its head coach, Alberto Salazar. Now, it's my understanding that these investigations are still ongoing and they're as yet unproven. In fact, they're currently being investigated by US anti-doping and UK anti-doping. But that's not to say that these things were not being investigated before the media brought it to light. Naturally, the authorities won't share intelligence on what they're investigating, because to be doing that would be giving the game away to cheats all over the world. But what that program did do was at least hasten the investigative work being done and ensure that those doing the investigating would be scrutinized by the media. After all, there's nothing like a bit of public pressure to hasten important investigative work. And this investigative journalism plays a part in ensuring that sports doping scandals become more visible. And this is the key. Such journalism must be backed up by concrete evidence and facts. Responsible journalism is paramount because innocent until proven guilty has to prevail. We're talking about an athlete's livelihood after all. And journalism shouldn't be done rashly in a bid to boost TV ratings or sell newspapers. It has to be done responsibly. As we're talking of investigative journalism, I think it's interesting, is it not, that in Germany, the broadcaster ARD, which is a very big broadcaster, has its own fully funded anti-doping department. That's a TV station with a department related solely to doping issues. I think initiatives such as this are to be welcomed by organizations because they show that journalists take the matter seriously and that it won't be tolerated. And they allow the efforts of anti-doping organizations and doping instances to be scrutinized fully and highlighted. And it was no coincidence, therefore, that it was ARD and their top reporter, someone called Hayo Seppelt, who broke the story of alleged systematic doping in Russia last December. Earlier this year, I was with Hayo at a conference we were holding in Switzerland, and I asked him why he felt so strongly about doping issues. And do you know what he said? He said you would have to thank his parents for his strong attitude against doping. He said quite simply, it was a question of morals and what was right and what was wrong. Nothing more, that was it. And I think his answer really hits the nail on the head, because we, the public, know that doping is wrong and we don't stand for it. This summer, we in the anti-doping industry faced some serious newspaper reports on what were believed to be thousands of suspicious blood values of athletes. And I've got a copy here to show you what we were dealing with. This is the Sunday Times from the UK, and this was the headline: "Revealed Sport's Dirtiest Secret." Now, this gave us in the anti-doping community a huge amount to think about, a huge amount of work to do, and it gave our independent commission a lot to investigate. The investigations into this are still ongoing, and the newspaper followed up these reports by asking athletes to declare their private medical data, so in other words, their blood values, in order to prove that they were clean. Now, I think there's a fine line, a very fine line, between what's necessary in the name of transparency and what could be seen as a media witch hunt, as we could see in a call such as this. While WADA prioritizes transparency above all else, and while it is indeed an athlete's personal choice if they want to put their blood values in the media, such a selective release of those values could lead to huge misinterpretation. And what it could also imply is that those athletes that don't do so might have something to hide. So it's a real balancing act. The merits of this investigative journalism have to be balanced with what's in the public interest. But they have to be balanced with the rights of the athletes. And as I said earlier, innocent until proven guilty has to prevail. If we look at the rules for anti-doping organizations on working with the media, there's a rule which says they may announce an alleged doping violation before 20 days, once an athlete has a positive sample. But they have to release details of a violation when it's confirmed after 20 days. That's the process. It's an established process that's been in place for a while, and it works well. It has to be respected, and I say most journalists do appreciate why it's in place. And we in anti-doping, we're not trying to hide behind this process. We're not trying to make it difficult for journalists that are looking for that scoop. But every athlete has a right to their day in court to prove that they're not guilty of doping. So if journalists don't get an answer from anti-doping organizations early in a case due to this process, some will decide to go to unofficial sources. They might go to the parents or family, to coaches, to the doctor, to the agent, to try and get the information and the real story. I repeat here, an athlete's rights must trump the public interest in this, and I think most often journalists do respect that. And it's important for journalists to report instances of doping at the appropriate time. Only then should athletes be named and shamed, which, by the way, in itself is quite a deterrent to doping. The thought of being publicly announced as a doper may deter athletes from doping and the humiliation that goes with it. In other words, the risk of being outed as a doper often outweighs the reward of doping itself. The 24-hour news cycle that we face today in 2015, it places a huge burden on today's journalists to get their story at any cost. Many journalists have to be not only a jack of all trades, but a master of all trades today. And what's more, whilst this news cycle has led to huge changes in the way today's media operates, in anti-doping our resources have remained almost entirely the same. Not to mention the complexity of what we deal with in anti-doping. In this 24-hour news cycle, media wants simple, fast, black and white answers. Anti-doping, as you can imagine, is often far from black and white. And this has put huge pressure on how we in anti-doping have to feed the media's voracious appetite. And furthermore, how do we deal with misinformation in the public domain? Well, at WADA, we often have to go behind the do not confirm or deny answer, because anything that we say could prejudice the ongoing legal process. So what about the media anti-doping relationship? Well, it was a topic that I tackled in a symposium we held in Switzerland back in March. What's clear is that sporting and anti-doping organizations must work with, not against, the media. These organizations must not be defensive when reasonable questions are being asked of their sport or their country. The fact that there's now a much greater understanding of anti-doping rules than there was, say, 10 or 15 years ago has contributed to a vastly improved relationship. In my position at WADA, I'm very fortunate to enjoy positive relationships with journalists on both sides of the Atlantic. The countries that tend to cover doping most intensely tend to be the United States and the United Kingdom, two great countries, I should add, as well as many countries in continental Europe. Anti-doping organizations were once seen as something of a closed shop. Perhaps they were seen as being too bureaucratic, too dry. But today, these organizations and media work hand in hand on anti-doping work. We enjoy constructive relationships and have a general agreement that we're all in this together. We all want the same thing after all, and that is clean sport. In anti-doping, we accept that the doping issue will never be eradicated entirely. But we do have a job of reducing doping and protecting clean athletes so that clean, honest sport can prevail. Anything else would be an abdication of our responsibility to keep sport clean and to uphold the values that the world holds so dear, fair play and the strong spirit of sport that we all in this room have come to know and cherish. So, at a time when other issues are increasingly affecting the integrity of sport, these issues being match fixing or illegal betting, fraud, corruption, to name just a few, what importance does doping still have as an issue of media interest? Many of you in this room will have seen the FBI-led investigation of alleged corruption within FIFA, the world soccer governing body, that took place earlier this year. This was a huge issue in the public eye, and it was proof that doping is not standing alone as an issue threatening the integrity of sport. But rather than competing with these other issues for airspace in the media, we've got to work together. Because after all, these issues are all fundamentally about the same thing. They're about sporting values, and we all have to row in the same direction. As we've seen from this week's events, doping, however, is still king in terms of media matters because unlike these other ethics issues, it affects athletes where it hurts, at their one shot at a medal, at their one shot at glory. And that's why there's such a high level of public interest. The public can sympathize with the athletes that have been cheated out of success. Thank you for listening.
I grew up in harness racing, and when I was a kid, I just used some of Ben's language. I thought it was pro-doping sport. It was pretty much anything goes. And a few years ago, our next speaker took over the Meadowlands, which is the crown jewel of American harness racing. And it was clear pretty soon that it was a different story. Unlike anything I had seen, it was a breath of fresh air as far as anyone who wanted to see racing on the up and up. And so I've asked a few times since he's been in charge there whether thoroughbred racetrack operators have sought him out and asked what he's doing right, what's worked, and the answer each time has been no. And so we took the opportunity to bring him here, and it's really nice to have his perspective on this topic, and I'm sure you're going to enjoy the way he tells it. Mr. Jeff Corral, the operator of the Meadowlands and 2 other harness tracks.
Thanks a lot. I have to be honest, I really didn't prepare anything. But I was just thinking when you talked about the old days of harness racing, and I have to admit with a guilty conscience that the reason I used to go to the track all the time. I grew up near Roosevelt Raceway, Yonkers, and in those days there'd be 30, 40,000 people. You'd lose your car in the parking lot. It was just a great place to go with your friends, and it gave you something to do on a Saturday night if you couldn't get a date, and that was how I became very interested in harness racing. And I actually, back in those days, the perception was that harness racing was totally dishonest and that the drivers were cheating, and they were probably. But drugs was not part of it. So I always wanted to buy a horse because I figured if I bought a horse, I'd get inside in the paddock and I'd get all the inside information, and I'd be able to turn around all my losing efforts into winning efforts. So I have to admit that what got me to be an owner wasn't really all that inspirational. It was kind of like, let me get in the paddock and see what's going on. And here I am today talking about integrity. But I've matured. And the one thing that's different about the subject that I'm going to talk about a little bit compared to the WADA issue is that we're dealing with animals that don't have the ability to say, I really don't want to take that drug, and don't have the ability to say what's in it. Is there any research on what the effect is going to be? Will I become sterile? Will I be this? Will I be that? They just are animals that somebody puts a chemical into their body, and no one really knows in many cases what the long-term effects are. And it's not unusual if you follow some of the more dishonest people that after some of these horses have been in their barn for a couple of starts, and somebody claims them, it's not unusual for them to say, oh my God, this horse was in terrible condition. So we're really dealing with an issue that is a moral issue for me, because these animals can't talk and they have no ability to say this shouldn't happen. And what amazes me about all of this is that, and I'm really, I don't know that much about thoroughbred racing. I actually owned a couple of thoroughbreds, but I can only talk about standardbred racing. And the reality is that we have no drug testing program. We have just a sham drug testing program, because the fact is that, and I'm sure that the people at Valor would agree, that what we basically do is we tell the trainer when exactly we're going to take the test of their horse, which is either right before or right after they race, so he knows exactly within a few minutes when we're taking that blood test, and we tell him what we're testing for. So how are you supposed to catch anybody using illegal medication when the reality is that no one in their right mind would give an illegal drug to a horse if they know that they're going to get caught? And that's why essentially what we have going on in our industry today is that these drugs are administered either at a point in time where they know it won't show up on the hour that they know they're going to be tested, or they're using drugs that they know we're not testing for. And I just find that to be a moral disgrace. Now, we've been talking about this forever. I mean, this is certainly something that's been discussed for the last 10 years at a bare minimum. I think Barry's been talking about it for the last 7 years. And we're no closer to a solution than we were 10 years ago, because the industry doesn't appear to have the will to do the right thing and clean this up. And in my case, and that's not, we have some great people. I mean, the WOA people, the Jockey Club, they're trying their best to make changes, and the approach to try to get legislation passed that would turn this over to USADA would certainly work, would certainly solve the problem. But anyone who follows politics knows how difficult it is to get anything passed in Congress today. And the problem is that our industry isn't united behind this effort. So if you're a congressman sitting at a hearing on this subject, you would have Ed Martin, who's, I guess, represents the people who do the testing, the veterinarians and stuff. He would show up and tell the congressman there's not a problem. We don't have a problem. We have it under control. We've researched. We've come up with a list of drugs. We've come up with a time that they can be administered. So, gentlemen, there is no problem. Then you would have this guy, Al Foreman, who is an attorney that represents the horsemen, and he'll say, well, gentlemen, we tested 4 million horses and there were 3 positives, and therefore we have no problem. And you would then have the horseman, Rick Violet, or somebody else, and Rick's a friend of mine, he would come and say the same thing. He said, we don't have a problem. I don't know why anybody in their right mind would want the federal government or USADA to take this over. Don't you people have something better to worry about, like hunger in America or education? Leave us alone. And we're doing fine. And the reality is that the public doesn't buy that. But the public is not clamoring Congress to do something about it, because the public that we have left is a fraction of the public that existed 30 or 40 years ago when I first got into the business. So we have a real dilemma, and in my mind, the only solution, which is really simple, is for the track owners to step up to the plate and finally do the right thing, something that they should have done years ago, and say enough is enough. We have a moral obligation to our customers, to these animals, to make sure that when they step foot on the racetrack, that they're racing without any illegal medication. And it's as simple as that. And when I took over the Meadowlands, and we invested $120 million. So the Meadowlands facility is brand new, it's gorgeous, it's cool, it's the state of the art. If there is a future for racing, this is the racetrack of the future. The first thing that I said to myself was, well, I didn't spend $120 million to create a place for dishonest people to make a living. Simple. Why would you? And fortunately, I approached the state police and I said, if you could help me, just arrest one person. If you took one of these guys out of here in handcuffs, that would be the end of it. Because most of these trainers only get, in our business, they get 5% of the money. And why would you go to jail for 5% of the money? 90% is going to the owner of the horse. And they said to me, well, you don't understand, Jeff. You have more power than we do, because it's private property, and when somebody drives onto your property in the truck and trailer, you can stop them at the gate and search their truck. You don't need any other, you don't need probable cause, you don't need anything. You can just say, open the back of the truck, open your trunk. He said, we can't do that. Under the law, as state police, we have to have probable cause. We would have to have probable cause to go to someone's barn and investigate, look for something, unless we had a warrant or clear knowledge that horses were being drugged. But they said, but there's one of, they say, and a matter of fact, 5 years ago, the state police, we had a group of troopers whose sole job was to try to catch these drug guys. And unfortunately, 2-3 years ago, with budget cuts, that unit was abandoned. But the guy who ran it was a guy whose father was a trainer, and he worked with horses, and he's going to retire in 3 or 4 months. Why don't you hire him and let him go after these guys? So I met with him, and sure enough, he retired a couple months later, and I hired him, and I gave him the job of cleaning up the sport. And basically, the way we did it was very simple. Any track owner can do it. Keeneland can do it. Churchill can do it. Naira can do it. We basically said, if you want to race here, you have to sign an application, stable application, and it says that we have the right at any time that we want to go to your barn, to go wherever your horse is, call you up and tell you we're here, send your veterinarian over, we want to take blood. It's called out-of-competition testing, and I'm sure that a lot of people can tell you that's what they do. They don't tell any athlete what time they're coming to test them. They just show up unannounced, knock on the door, and ask them to pee into a cup and put that sample into a tube and send it off to the lab. And that is exactly what we did. We basically started going around. We started with the people we suspected were the drug guys. We took samples. We showed up on Sunday. We showed up when the least expected us to show up. And we decided that we would send the samples to Hong Kong, because people told me that Hong Kong has the cleanest racing in the world. And initially, Hong Kong agreed to do the testing for free. So the first 2 or 3 months, they were testing the horses for free. And the first thing we discovered was that people were using cobalt. And nobody was testing for cobalt in America. Nobody knew what it was. And we discovered that it was basically a form of EPO. It had the same impact. It was a blood builder. And as soon as these tests came back positive, I told the trainers of those horses they could no longer race at the Meadowlands or my other 2 tracks. And that was that. And fortunately, one of the leading drug guys, a guy named Lupena, we didn't even bother taking tests for him because he was such a notorious drug guy. We just told him he couldn't race. And yeah, and the reason was simple. The guy was a trainer for 10 years in California, and the most money his horses had ever won was $400,000. Some years he won $200,000. Now he comes to the Meadowlands before I was involved, and in this first year in New Jersey, now keep in mind, he came with no horses, just no horses, just opened up shop with no horses. He won $10 million in purses. He was the leading trainer at the Meadowlands, Yonkers, Chester, and Pocono. So essentially, this guy became the greatest trainer that ever lived overnight, after being a stumble bum for 10 years in California. And fortunately, he sued us on the grounds that I was depriving him of making a living, of being able to earn a living, et cetera, et cetera. And I passed this information on to my lawyer, who put it in the brief that this guy, you know, mysteriously became the greatest trainer that ever lived. And he did that 2 years in a row. He won $10 million 2 straight years. And we won. The judge ruled that it was private property, and I did not have to let him race. So once I won that lawsuit, basically everybody has folded their tent and said, well, I guess Goral can tell us I can't race or I can race. And I really try hard to be fair, because I'm essentially judge and jury, which is not where you want to be. And I will meet anybody I ask to tell they can't race. If they call and ask to meet with me, I'll meet with them and hear their side of the story. As a result, we have a long list of trainers who can't race at my 3 tracks. The fact is that the sad part is that they can race at the 3 tracks I compete with. New York and Pennsylvania, and the owners of those facilities make absolutely no effort to kick these guys out. They race there. Even Pena races at these places. Even though he's lost his license, he uses beards, I guess is the right word. So he has beards show up. People tell me that the truck comes in with his name on the truck, and the trainers get off with the horses. 2 go to this trainer, 3 go to this trainer, and they just use a different name. But basically, he's training the horses, and nobody makes any effort whatsoever in Pennsylvania and New York to do anything about it. And it's just the way, the way it is. It's unfortunate. But anyone who thinks for 1 minute that these states are going to solve this problem are kidding themselves. They don't care. They can say anything they want. They don't care, and I'll tell you how bad it is. Bryce called in some favors from the state police and the FBI and the DEA, and we did a sting on a trainer who was selling drugs at the various training centers. In standardbred, most horses train at farms, and just like on TV, you know, a guy went in, bought drugs, came out, thanked the guy, came back a week later, bought more drugs, came back a week later, bought more drugs, and then the 4th time, just like you see on TV, squad cars came roaring down the street, everybody jumped out of the car, guns drawn, knocked on his door, and opened up his garage, and in his garage, the entire garage was filled with drugs. And he was arrested, and I said, wow, this is great. He's not going to want to go to jail. He's going to tell us everything he knows, and we're going to get to the bottom of who's buying these drugs, what drugs are they, all of this, all the things that you see on TV. It's going to solve the problem. And nothing happened. To show you what a joke it is, he didn't even lose his license in Pennsylvania. So here's a guy that was arrested in New Jersey for selling drugs. And not only did they find a garage full of drugs, I think they found $60,000 of cash in a shoebox, which was a good thing for us, because the fact that he had cash in a shoebox elevates it to like a class 2 felony. So if he does go to jail, he could go to jail for a few years. And now, 2 years later, they finally indicted this guy. And they still haven't arraigned him. They still haven't questioned him. So this will give you an idea how much the states care about this problem. They don't care 1 iota about the problem. And it's very simple. The track owners have a moral obligation to their customers, to the animals that set foot on the track, and for them to allow this to happen at Keeneland and Churchill and Saratoga and Santa Anita and Gulfstream and all the other tracks is morally wrong. And I think he said it. This is a moral issue for me. You're either honest or you're not. And if you don't care enough to concern yourself with putting out a product that you're asking the public to bet on and to watch and to ensure the public that these horses haven't been drugged, you shouldn't own the racetrack. You should do something else with your life. And this is something that could be solved in the next week if we could get just those 5 organizations to step up to the plate and say, you know what, let's sit down and come up with our own plan. Let's fund it. Let's ask the horsemen to fund half of it. We'll fund the other half. The horsemen are in a tight spot. What are they going to say? We don't want to fund it. We don't believe in out-of-competition testing. How can they say that? Unless they're flat out dishonest. Take the LASIX issue off the table, because that's controversial, I guess, obviously. Just say we want to do out-of-competition testing, and we want to send the samples to a first-class lab, either in Hong Kong, where we'll build our own lab, or we'll find the lab. Basically, or we want to turn it over to USADA. But we're not going to wait for the government to say that. We're going to do it. And if you want to race at our tracks, you agree that in exchange for being allowed to race, you sign a piece of paper that allows us to show up at your barn at all hours. And it's worked fine for me. I had one training center that basically the guy said, you can't come on our property. So I said, okay, just tell all the people who train at your facility that they can't race at the Meadowlands. A few days later, I got a call from the guy, well, could we talk about what hours you're going to come on the property? Are you going to tell us when you're coming? So we were able to work something out that we're not coming at 4 o'clock in the morning, because it's not necessary. But, you know, I haven't solved the entire problem, but I can tell you that by and large, at the 3 tracks I own, there are no known drug trainers racing there. There may be people using drugs that we don't know about, but we keep trying, we keep testing, we send the samples. We've tried sending hair samples. We just keep trying and plugging away. We do surveillance, and I guarantee you that if the 5 track owners plus myself, if we all got together, we hired a couple of FBI guys that have retired, a couple of DEA guys, we find a lab that we feel is reliable, we won't be talking about this anymore. Be over. There'll be no drugs, because without out-of-competition testing, you're not testing at all. And I guarantee you that anyone in the drug testing of humans will tell you that the only thing that works is out-of-competition testing, showing up at unannounced, asking someone to pee in the cup, in our case, showing up unannounced, asking the trainer to have his veterinarian draw blood, give it to us, and we send it in for a sample. So I really hope that the track owners are listening, and if they don't do something about it, then the fact of the matter is they simply don't care. And they can say whatever they want. I lose $3 million a year running the Meadowlands. If I can afford to spend $150,000 to try to keep the drug guys out, I would think Keeneland, who probably is does very well, Churchill, Naira gets $50 million a year from slots. Mr. Stronach, he loves horses. He's a breeder. He knows what I'm talking about. I'm sure that these people can afford to do what I've done, and that's it. We're done. We'll clean it up. We'll worry about the LASIX next time, but there is no way that anyone should tolerate the fact that these horses are being given illegal medication knowingly, and that we're going to rely on the various states that are all struggling budget-wise to spend the money needed. To give you an idea, New York bought the equipment to test for cobalt, but they don't test for cobalt because the lab that does the testing doesn't get enough from New York to cover the cost of testing for cobalt. So in New York, they don't test for cobalt. In New Jersey, they don't test for cobalt. So there's a drug that we know is a performance-enhancing drug. The other thing that shows you how bad things are is Joe Gorachek, who is probably the only regulator that really did care in Indiana, recently was let go because of complaints from the horsemen that he wasn't doing enough to market the sport. And if there's one thing I know about the horsemen, they've never, in all the years I've been involved, I've never heard them say, let's spend money marketing the sport. All they want is take the money for purses. So Yeah, I'm glad that that Barry has chosen to honor Stan Bergstein. Stan was a good friend of mine and someone who really fought hard for the integrity issue, a great guy. And it's interesting that someone in the thoroughbred game would be honoring Stan, but Stan is someone who should have been honored. And I commend you, Barry, and thank you for inviting me. And I hope that the message gets through to these thoroughbred track owners that they are absolutely committing a moral it's a moral issue. Think about the same thing in football. Would the owners of the football teams, would they allow their players to use drugs? When the pressure is mounted, they decided that we're going to randomly test their players, and now the players don't use drugs anymore. Same in baseball. The owners stepped up, not the federal government, not the states. The owners of the teams stepped up and cleaned it up. And the same thing here. The owners of the tracks have the same obligation that the owners of the teams did. They got to step up and clean it up. Thank you, everybody.
I think some horsemen are in charge of the step here. So we're going to reveal the winner of the award. Barry can come up here. I'll tell you quickly about the process here. We nominated 8 stories this year. 3 of them were Ray Pollock from the Pollock Report. Natalie Voss from the Pollock Report has a nomination. Frank Angst has 2 nominations from the Blood Horse. Frank Vespi and Doug McCoy from a website called The Racing Biz, and Chris Wittstruck from the USD website and the harness racing. And Barry will tell you who won.
First of all, I would like the nominated riders that are here to please stand up and be recognized. Excuse me. As Jeff said, and I read here, it was almost impossible to pick a winner this year. The winner won by 1 vote. I read all the stories again last week. Very tough to figure out who would win because each one was really special. The story that won is the kind of story that I wish I had written. The writer of this story cited a problem, and in a very entertaining and thought-provoking way, explained the problem, and then, which I like, he gave a solution. It's a brilliant story. The winner is Chris Wittstruck. This is the first winner we've had that wrote a story about the harness industry. However, this story is applicable to all breeds and all types of racing, and I urge you all to read it. The way it was written was just spectacular. Chris?
Well, thank you so much, and I'm actually looking for the infield tote board. I want to see if my number's flashing. Somebody must have lodged a claim of foul, because I'll tell you, and no disrespect to the judges, and now I'm very happy to find that I only won by 1 vote, because I'll tell you that I read each one of those stories that were nominated, and I read them in real time, meaning that I read them at around the time that they were posted. And I'll tell you that I would rank every one of those 7 stories above mine. They were excellent, excellent stories, and I think everyone should be proud who was in fact nominated. I'd also like to say that I cannot accept this award for myself, because I think everyone here who writes understands that for every fair to middling writer, there is behind them an unbelievably great editor. And I'm so proud to say that at the USTA, my great editor is a woman named Ellen Harvey. Ellen is the director of the Harness Racing Communications Division of the United States Trotting Association. She's a lifelong person in this industry, and she's just so unbelievable. And with her tremendous editing, I've been able to win not only this award, but 2 John Hervey Awards. And I chalk it all up to Ellen. She's just an unbelievably fantastic person, and she takes a very poor writer like me and makes me fair to middling and lets me sneak in and win an award once in a while. There's something else, though, and that is that while I am very, very honored to win this award, I can't accept the monetary aspect of it. I can't. Let me just take a moment. I know it's getting late, but I do want to speak to you. I love this sport. I've loved this sport since I'm 14 years old. Go to Aqueduct, stand on the apron with a lukewarm cup of coffee in the middle of the winter. It's drizzling, it's dark, it's dank. The wind is blowing 30 miles an hour over from JFK Airport. And we're standing there, myself and my friends, and we're waiting for yet another 6-furlong event on the inner track. We had a word for that. That word is paradise. How many times we would go to Aqueduct or Belmont, come out after the 9th race, throw our program on the ground and say, I'll never bet another so-and-so horse in my life. Walk 50 feet, hand the man $2, get in the back of a van, and be driven to Roosevelt. That's how we spend Saturdays in New York. Let me tell you a little bit about Stan Bergstein. Stan was a legend. And you'd have to know that by growing up in New York in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, when New York City off-track betting came in 71. They sponsored television shows that put harness racing right on TV in prime time, Saturday nights, Friday nights. First it was racing from Monticello. Then it was from Roosevelt and Yonkers. And it was Stan who was on that television show. I can't tell you how many people knew nothing about horse racing and less than nothing about harness racing, but knew who Stan Bergstein was, and how many people Stan got interested in the great sport of horse racing. Just fantastic. Now let me be completely transparent. Later in Stan's life, when I got to interact with him, he didn't like me too much. You see, I'm an attorney. I'm also a director for the Standardbred Owners Association of New York. That's the group that represents a large swath of the New York harness horsemen. And in my roles, I try as much as I can to protect the fundamental rights of horsemen, make sure that they're safe. And that leads me in conflict not only with racing commissions at times, but also sometimes racetrack managements. Stan, well, his last role was as the executive director or executive vice president of Harness Tracks of America, a management group. So we certainly didn't agree with everything, but you know what? There were things that we did agree with, or agree on, should I say. And one of the things that Stan and I, and we spoke about it, agreed on, was this. The most important thing we can do in this sport is to make the next generation fall in love with it. And that's so unbelievably important. We thought that the Atari joystick was the big competition. Can you imagine back in the 70s? These kids, they don't want to go to the track. They don't want to even learn about horse. They don't want to do anything. They want to play with video games. And look where we are now, video poker. You can't even go to a gas station anymore. You can't get to buy gas. Everyone's playing lotto. People are dueling over quarterbacks and they're drafting linebackers. Look at all the competition that there is. We have to find a way to get people not only interested in the sport, but to love it. The Harness Horse Youth Foundation of Westfield, Indiana, is an unbelievable charitable organization. What they do is they run camps all across the east coast of the United States during the summer at various harness tracks. Mr. Garral's harness tracks are sponsors. They run camps for adolescents, 5-day mini camps. They expose them to every aspect of the sport, not only with farriers and veterinarians and other folks in the sport, but they get to enter their own horses in a race, get in 2-seat jog carts, and actually conduct racing. The group, Harness Horse Youth Foundation, also runs camps for older children, teenagers, leadership camps to try and develop the next stage of leaders in our industry. Finally, and this is something that's very, very important, they also provide college scholarships to individuals who have a tremendous interest in being in this industry. Now, they started in 1976. In 1979, they developed a Leadership in Youth Award in 1979. The inaugural winner of that award was Stan Bergstein. Stan loved the organization. And I can think of no other fitting way to honor Stan and to advance the interests of the sport that we all here today love than to respectfully request that Team Valor make the monetary amount of money that they would have otherwise given to me, the writer, and donate it to the Harness Horse Youth Foundation. It's something that Stan would have loved. And I really do think it's great that you're all here, and I'm especially pleased to see the young college students here. Again, that's something Stan would have loved, to have seen college students who are concerned not only about the industry, but about the horse themselves. And I'll leave you tonight with the 3 words that Stan left all of us with in New York after every Saturday night's broadcast. Good night, all.
I'd like to invite you all to stick around. We have drinks and dessert. And we also want to give a special thank you to Jessica Berry for her coordination of this event. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you very much. That's it.